So I have the graffiti on one layer. I've pasted this wall on the second layer. I need the wall behind the graffiti. So to actually shuffle it, I need to release this from being locked. Now the background by default stays locked. You can double click on it, it becomes a layer, and then it behaves like any other layer, and you can shuffle these images. Okay, so I've moved that behind. To reveal the wall, I'll just select the outermost layer and I can mask it. I can create a mask on it if I want, or I can delete it. If I delete it, obviously I see the wall, but I'll show you how to mask it. If I add a layer mask, having selected it, you can see what has happened is the inside has got filled with black and the outside is filled with white. But if I click on the mask and I press Ctrl I, the black becomes white and the white becomes black. That's okay. And that's what happens. The white is opaque and the black is transparent. And that's what is going to happen with you guys when you use a transparency map in 3D Studio Max. In fact, if you use the gradient and you put it on a cylinder which is sticking in front of a torch that you have modeled, you will be able to make a beam which actually fades off from opaque to transparent. You'll be able to make rays. There are volumetric lights that do that for you automatically, but I'm trying to emphasize that masks is something you will use everywhere, and especially in motion graphics. So I've got this graffiti sticking on a wall, but it looks like a cutout still. I might scale it a bit, and when I scale it, because the mask is linked, you can see there's a link icon there. Because the mask is linked, they scale together. So how do I get the wall on top of this? Just try and understand these steps. I need a copy of the wall for that. I got a copy of the wall. Now this wall which is here, I can go to image, adjustments, hue saturation. Okay, I'll do that again. Image, adjustments, hue saturation. I want to remove the saturation of this. There are many ways of doing it. You can desaturate it in several ways. This is just me being a 10-year-old Photoshop user doing it traditional way. You can colorize it into a single color if you want, and we will do that when we do the posters. But for right now, I'm just removing the saturation and I'm saying, okay, I want more black and white, so I will increase the contrast. Under brightness contrast, if I increase the contrast, black becomes darker, the darker shades become darker, brightness, the brighter shades become brighter. So I've increased the contrast. Now what do I want to do with it? I want to make a pattern with this. I make a selection, and you need to make a selection. And you must have seen people on DeviantArt creating these awesome brushes. You can basically create one brush, select it, and then you can say edit. You can define it as a pattern, you can define it as a brush, whatever you have selected. So if you want to paint an eye several times, create an eye, make a selection, keep the background layers transparent, make a selection and define that selection as a brush. I'm defining this as a pattern. I'm going to call it wall. So I've got a pattern called wall. Cool. Now I don't need this layer. You see, on this layer where I've got the graffiti, I'm going to go into effects, and we'll see a bit more of this today. Under effects, I'll just open blending options. This is where some of us have used drop shadows. This is where some of us have used inner shadows, glows. And bear in mind, this applies to the opaque part of the layer. See, whatever is opaque on the layer, that's where it applies. In the same way, I can apply bevel and emboss. And if I select bevel and emboss, I get the options. See, it's actually beveling it. And there's an outer bevel, there's an inner bevel. I can actually say outer bevel. So it'll bevel outwards. So you can see this is beveled. Now, I don't want any of this. I don't want this bevel and emboss really. I'm not interested in the bevel and emboss. I'm interested, however, in the texture. And you can see as I increase the depth, can you see what's happening? The texture is being embossed on the surface. And I have a pattern here called wall. and that wall matches my background wall, and I can choose how bad I want it to actually be. You can see you're going to play with these things. Scale actually reduces the wall. It starts multiplying. I'll show you this a bit more clearly. Scale scales up the pattern. See that? And scales down the pattern. I want to match it 100% because it's actually matching the wall right now. Whatever I've selected matches the wall behind. And the depth, I just want a very subtle depth. Once it's applied, it looks as if the paint is, stuck to the wall. And does that make sense? So just understand, you're not learning Photoshop in this course. You're learning how to apply your ideas, how to liberate yourself from the limitations of software. And many of you are really creative people. And creative artists, when they start using a digital tool, they really get annoyed because the freedom that you have with a canvas, with a brush, with a paper, with a pencil, it gets taken away. And you suddenly have to rely on these tools. But if you take time to learn these tools, you realize how powerful they are. They will help you to express your ideas. So that's one thing for today, the emboss effect and defining a pattern. It was a question asked of me in this class last week and in the screen class, and I was holding back because one of the exercises I had planned was this emboss. But anyway, let's have a look at this second emboss. Let's have a look at some more emboss. So I'm just going to make another circle here. Not a great circle, but if I keep this marquee button pressed, I get all the other options. In Photoshop, whenever you see a tiny triangle, in fact in any software these days, whenever you see a tiny triangle at the bottom right corner, it is suggesting that there are more features available here. So if you go here, more features available, and picked up circle, we don't want this. Let's just get a circle here. And I'll start with a new layer. New layer. Good morning. Okay, so start with a circle. I'm going to fill it in. I'll try not to be boring. I won't put you to sleep. I've just filled it with any color using edit fill. Now, what you can do is, there are many ways of applying a gradient. While that selection was on, I could have actually, there's a gradient tools under paint bucket tool. You can choose the gradient tool. By default, it goes foreground to background. You can go foreground to transparent. You can go black to white, and there are some other presets. You might decide to make your own. You can say new. And you can adjust these crayons. See, if you pull it out, you can't pull out this one because at least two are needed. But if I add one more, and I can pull this one out. So these are crayons. Each crayon has a color. And each crayon has an opacity. So if I click here or here, I can choose the opacity, and even the opacity can be made into a gradient. So you can go from opaque to transparent and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to muck around with the opacity. I just need a few colors. Now if you press the Alt key and drag, in fact if you press the Alt key and drag anything in Photoshop, you get a copy. Okay. For example, if you were to actually press the Alt key and drag this selection, you get a copy. If there's no selection, if you press the Alt key and drag this circle, you get a new layer. So pressing the Alt key and dragging gives you a new layer. So you can either fill that gradient here, bang, control and click on this will actually give you the selection, and you can fill it with this gradient. Gradient linear, you can have linear, you can have radial, circular, radial, and so on. I'm just going for some kind of a linear gradient. I'm going to then try and apply one of those bevel and embosses here. So it just gets a bit, yeah, you can see that bevel and emboss being applied there. It just gets a bit embossed. Now in the olden days, when we did not have bevel and emboss at a click, embossing was done the traditional way, and I'll show you how it was done. For example, if I have a line, and that's a black line, I'm just going to make a copy of it. If I press the Alt key, I've got a copy of it, and if I press Ctrl I, it becomes white. Now can you see it gives the appearance of a groove. A black and white line gives the appearance of a groove. That's how the visual illusion of beveling and embossing is done. And when we start making our cyborg, we'll do that next time. If you want to start cutting on a skin and start making as if this skin is made of plastic parts and put together, you want grooves on it the way grooves are there on a helmet or any molded part, you need to use this. And if I actually make this transparent, it becomes probably a bit more believable. Now I've got two layers here. I'll just merge them, and you can see then it starts getting a bit more believable. Now that's the trick. So if you have something that needs embossing, and let's see, I have something else here. I'm just gonna get this guy, try and emboss him on a coin. You can get anything. It doesn't have to be a flat picture. The concept is just easier to explain on a flat picture, that's all. So let's say you have this, okay. This is one of the olden tricks I used to use. If you press Control and click on this guy, it selects the outline. Now what you do is you hide that, go to the gradient layer, do a copy and paste, and what that gives you is this silhouette in the gradient texture. Once you have that, you can do a lot of things. Just a slight adjustment of hue saturation will start giving you a bit of your darkness. A bit of an inner shadow will give you the impression that it's being chiseled into the surface. A bit of a bevel and emboss will give you the impression that it is raised from the surface, and so on. What I used to do is, once I have the silhouette, go away. Once I have this, I would go to a new layer and stroke this with white, 2 pixel. Okay, I'll start with black. I need black anyway. Black. Make another new layer, edit, stroke it with white. So I've got a black and a white. Now the white, I can move it 1 pixel up and down. The black, I can move it 1 pixel down. And you can see how it starts looking like a ridge, a groove. And you can control the intensity of the black and white. So if you want the darkness to be just very, very subtle, you can control that, and you start getting a groove. And if this was a picture like a wall with details like a face, you would get a face. I had a when I created this, I had some kind of a texture which I had traced. So that's the emboss tool which I wanted to show you. I'll stop this video and just take some questions.